Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. It actually is a very sincere privilege to introduce you to Mark Roman. He was nice enough to join our firm several years ago. He has an incredibly unique background. Before he ever went to law school, he was in the private sector doing cybersecurity and data security for a number of entities in the Capital District, large entities. Decided to go to law school because he was concerned, obviously, about the laws and how they affect employers, businesses, and their obligations in connection with employee and customer data. He's highly certified. I actually looked up all of his certifications and talked to somebody who indicated that these are not lightly granted. They're requirements significantly higher than getting your SEC licenses and certifications. Mark teaches at Albany Law School on a part-time basis. He's got a job now as Chief Security Officer for a large multinational company and is of counsel to our firm. I think it's a unique opportunity to get the background check on what cybersecurity issues may exist for auto dealers or for any business that deals with consumer data and information. The risk of loss, as you all know, is gigantic. In the car industry alone, you're seeing awards of $24 million in one instance for a dealership group that dropped the ball on protecting consumer data. So it's something to pay attention to. Unfortunately, it's money and effort that you're going to spend on the bottom line protecting it, and you won't see that benefit unless you screw up, and then you'll know what you lost. So please pay attention. Feel free to reach out to Mark at any time if you have some follow-up questions, and thanks for attending.
Great. Thanks for the intro, Kate and Jim. I appreciate that. And I'm assuming everybody can see my screen as we're going to get started today. My goal really was to present something that might be a bit unique to dealerships, in that really the common factor is that you all use some sort of record-keeping system or some sort of business management system, administrative, inventory, typically referred to as DMSs, and we're going to focus on that today. I'm going to spill out from there once we address what the DMS is and how it actually functions at a high level, of course, to some of the specific risks and some of the dealer responsibilities that have to do with DMS operations, so that we're all going to be aware that really this isn't a set it and forget it and sort of let the manufacturer of the application worry about security. There's going to be this collaborative approach between dealers and DMS application providers, service providers that are related to that as well, in order to ensure a secure environment. So we only have really functionally about 50 minutes here. I'm going to try to wrap up here about 12:55, so that there would be time for questions. And then any follow-ups after that, of course, I can help address via email or a phone call directly on an ad hoc basis, depending on the interest and the specific questions involved. So anyway, thanks again for the introductions. I'll actually get started here if we're all set. So really, moving to the first slide, I'm going to just preface by, for those who aren't aware, who might be on the call, I'm sure most of you are, but what is a DMS, right? It's a dealer management system. Companies have this type of application usually in place for any kind of large function, whether or not it's a dealer and this type of functionality for inventory management or dealership bundling for finance, sales, parts, things like that. Companies will have applications like PeopleSoft for human resources, or Great Plains, it used to be, for accounting. So these large-scale systems are fairly common among enterprise or even mid-size level companies. They're fairly comprehensive, so they're meant to carry a lot of weight and unify a lot of functionality. So in this case, talking about DMSs, what are they? So really, the definition I put is very generic: bundle management platform specifically for car dealerships or large equipment manufacturers. They've been adapted in recent years to also accommodate resellers for boat, bike, RV, power sports equipment, things like that, and have these modules to accommodate the functions that are required for these individual companies, such as finance, sales, parts, inventory, and administration. So it's a comprehensive umbrella type tool. And they definitely serve a very valuable function for these dealerships, for you guys in the field. I'm sure you know the value of these, especially in the last couple of years as they've improved. So may also help with tax return filings, online marketing, deal analytics, analyzing price points and margins. newer DMS systems can even support mobile access. So that's either for potential buyers or for the sales folks or for management. And you can see in this graphic here, we're showing some of the different areas, sales stats, scheduling, visitor management, et cetera. What do these have all in common? They would have sensitive data involved with them. Other than potentially inventory, which still could be business-specific related information that's private, all of these areas are going to contain particular NPI or non-private information for either the staff of the dealership or for potential clients or purchasers. So the DMS is really going to have its hand involved with managing data that's extremely sensitive in a sense. Not healthcare data, of course, but private information that could be used to basically compromise identities, banking information, credit card information, lots of stuff in here that's basically related to each person that helps drive the dealership business. And that's what these DMSs are designed to do. Right, so common scalable DMSs today, there's a couple of big ones, and they really have the majority of the market share. So I just listed 3 big ones here. I'm not actually endorsing or picking specific DMSs that I recommend. I'm just kind of picking out the ones that are more prominent in the field. So Dealer Socket, of course, Automate, Reynolds and Reynolds, or Ray and Reyes, they call it, and CDK Global, which is probably the market leader. And we're going to talk a little bit about those 3. I'll show you a little bit about the types of functionalities that they have and the comprehensiveness that they try to build into their processes. So just again, a quick screenshot here. I know nobody can probably read this, but this is an example of CDK Drive. And really what's the takeaway is that these are comprehensive dashboards that can help management, executive management, and sales management for that matter, understand point in time data and statistics with regard to the operation of the dealership. So that's what you'll see in common here. These are dashboards at this level that really help provide governance across the dealership and the business. So you can see here's an example of the Reynolds and Reynolds Era Ignite DMS. Yeah, again, in this case, these are report types, repair orders. So again, comprehensive listing, all digital, all traceable, and it provides a great paper trail. And again, now Dealer Socket with the dashboard here. We're back to, again, that global view, bar charts, easy to see. These applications, these DMS functionalities really distill a lot of data and make it easily accessible to all those that need it, whether it's day-to-day operations or, again, whether it's executives doing budget for annual review. So comprehensive. I'm going to focus a little bit on CDK Global because they are big and they do have an enormous market share. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about them to set the stage here for the scalability that we have. So CDK, according to some of my latest numbers, $2 billion in revenue, leading provider of globally, integrated IT solutions for auto retailers. And again, we're talking about over 30,000 retail locations across 100 nations. So it's global. So they're a very experienced, very comprehensive DMS provider. And as a result of the interest in them and the investment that they've put into their product, they can try to automate and integrate really all parts of the dealership and the buying process for sales, including all the functions here: acquisition, sales, financing, insuring, et cetera. So again, highly comprehensive. But again, we were talking about the data and then non-public information for both the purchasers and the employees of the dealership. So these are notable to keep track of these developments. Here on December 7th, just recently, 4 months ago or so, CDK pulled in a new CISO. So that's Chief Information Security Officer for the leadership team. All right, and that's a normal component for a large corporation. You have somebody like that focusing on cybersecurity or data privacy issues. And the point here is just to focus that even CDK Global at their level, especially I should say at their level, they're focused on security. You need to be focused on security, of course, for your company's operation, but they're also focused on the data protection for the data you're collecting if you're using the CDK Global applications. And so what does Mr. Hahn say here? His initial focus is to review a current state of information security, identify additional opportunities to further safeguard our data and information, create a plan to mitigate future risk. So at that level, at the leadership level of one of the largest DMS providers, they are focused on that, and they realize that this is a priority. Dave Hahn, I'm sure, has had quite a bit of information to try to synthesize and assimilate since he started, given the scope and the footprint of the CDK DMS applications. So this is happening at the DMS manufacturers at the highest level. Security awareness really has to happen from that level all the way down to you guys in the dealerships. So it's just that continuity and sort of synthesis of cooperative work between the two of you that's going to make this happen in a safe way and reduce risk. Okay. What's happening out there now with some of the DMSs that something like Mr. Hahn can help with in terms of his responsibility in information security has to do with DMSs being essentially asked to share data from the DMS platforms. And here I won't get into the specific details, but the buy-in here is that third-party modules or application integration must essentially happen. In this case, it's talking about Arizona law. And so in this case, it would be an offense, a criminal offense for a DMS to prevent a third party from integrating into each dealer's DMS or providing restrictions on third-party access to the dealer's DMS system. So this presents unique challenges for a DMS provider like CDK Global. They now need to provide open interfaces for third parties to be able to pull data out of the DMS, which basically exposes a whole new attack surface, an attack vector that we call it in security, where now it could introduce risk to the DMS itself by having these third-party applets, plugins, or applications actually bi-directionally communicating data, let's say, with the DMS. So it's just to show, this slide really just to show that the DMS sort of perimeter itself is being opened up in a sense to other applications. And those could be anything from security applications to other types of analytic applications. All right, so this just means that the DMS market needs to shift and also adopt a security platform that'll address basically third-party integration, which is sort of a relatively recent change. In years past, they've been mostly contained systems, which is a bit easier to manage. And so really, what I'm saying here on this slide is I'm giving you the statute if you want to look it up afterward, take the presentation, download that afterward. You can look this up if you like. Basically, the point here is in blue, DMS providers employ technological measures to safeguard their systems from unauthorized access or breach. We know that they can do that when it's a closed system, but it really does require a collaborative effort with the dealer, really the third-party apps that could be receiving data from a DMS and the DMS provider itself. So just to give you that sense that the scope of security awareness is really stretching out now, and doing risk evaluations is going to include a bit more than just a validation from, say, CDK Global that they've got a secure cloud or they've got a secure application. It's going to require really confirmation of how it's being used and what applications you're plugging into it as a dealer. Okay, that's the real takeaway there. Now, under the Arizona law, the court did talk about it should be fine to do this integration, okay, but it's assuming that there are industry standard data security measures that are taken. And again, we're kind of back to the dealer now. So this isn't so much what CDK Global is going to do. This is what is the dealership going to do in order to provide a secure environment for that NPI data or that non-public information. So here's a little laundry list of some of the top security areas that the court refers to, including program status updates on information security to the board of directors or executive management, employee awareness and training, monitoring your networks and systems, access controls, and SOD, segregation of duties, right? So, your service people don't have access to the accounting modules, things like that, role-based access control. UASR is a user account security review. So you're managing on some sort of basis annually, let's say, that users are appropriately provisioned to access particular portions of the DMS or other parts of your organization's logical systems. You're checking into this thing on a regular basis as a dealership. And this is part of your security program, and it needs to be implemented, and it needs to really be repeatable. And that's what audits are going to look for. They're going to look for the repetition of a plan that's been established, if in fact you're certifying that you're compliant in some particular state for whether it might be insurance licensing, trust licensing, or some kind of account certification. Encryption, review of inventory, vulnerability scanning, pen testing, third-party risk assessments, all great stuff, all part of a security program. Typically something that a DMS application provider won't do for you, although certainly to be collaborative, and they can provide mechanisms within the DMS to help provide the data that they can help protect. But it won't extend to every system that you have. So you don't want to have a false sense of security unless you're doing these things as well, that your data is safeguarded. This part of the presentation, I just wanted to talk quickly about the fact that there actually was some interest from the FTC in terms of antitrust with regard to some of the DMS giants, as they reported in automotive news. So between CDK and Reynolds, I guess about a year and a half ago now, there were inquiries by the FTC into whether or not there's an unfair competition. I don't think that's resolved at this point, but it shows that there's inquiries into the DMS market and how it's being controlled. So really, what does this mean? Frankly, it means that what you shouldn't do is just rely on one particular manufacturer's proprietary approach to providing security over your data. As a dealership, you're going to have responsibility that's independent of the DMS provider to protect your data, as I've been saying. And in fact, it's going to probably open up a bit more in the industry because there are other providers for DMS platforms besides CDK and Ray. In fact, some of the newer DMS providers I just referred to here, Techion, kind of a more recent player. I believe they started around 2014, 2015. I believe he was the former CIO for Tesla. He came out and created this DMS package. And so they think, they can improve on an existing footprint for DMS systems. And of course, there's the things that what the dealers want in a DMS, but what do you also need? So you need a modular framework these days. You need to be able to extend to different application integrations for either security or for business functionalities. So modularity, manageable security and privacy. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be able to be reached in terms of the settings or the configuration. It can't necessarily be config files that you can't locate. There should be a nice GUI interface to help you address that if it's in the DMS itself. Easy regulatory compliance, well, that's great if we can get it. Sometimes you can't predict all of that, but a lot of times security features will be bundled. So if you wanted to have, say, a GLBA package installed that'll help address any of those particular concerns, you might find that type of regulatory compliance module available. Red flags testing, for instance, that's another common one. Any kind of those financial type regulatory statutes and regulations, sometimes they're bundled in. So easy regulatory compliance would be great. And Techion, I think they offer this to some degree. I think CDK, I think Ray offer that to some degree as well. DealerMate as well. I'm not endorsing any particular DMS as part of this presentation, just indicating that there are current players that are large market share, and then there's expansion into different areas through providers such as Techion. Future upgrade path, that's also an important function. I think some of the prior, like Ray, they had, I think what was called Blue Screen, and it was very terminal looking, looked like a mainframe terminal type approach, and it worked very well for many years. And then they upgraded to this sort of Era Ignite GUI platform, which was much easier to use and train on. So how do you upgrade? You can easily upgrade GUI paths with application updates, as opposed to updating your servers and trying to download or install all new code bases. So you have to think about your upgrade path as well. I won't go through all this good stuff. Techion talks about some of the things we've just been discussing: personalization, artificial intelligence, machine learning. These are all things that DMSs can and do provide for the most part. And again, I highlighted some of the issues here that I think are critical to this presentation, but generally speaking to the topic. Security and compliance, highly secure and compliant across all states. That meaning all United States, because there are different sectoral-based security and privacy laws that could affect your dealership. Say between New York and Massachusetts, there are different statutes at the state level that you might need to comply with. So your DMS being aware of those particular compliance requirements is helpful. And this is interesting too, access to unlimited data. And Techion, really what they're trying to do in this case is provide an automotive retail cloud. So cloud providers, of course, provide services across a network, typically the internet, and it really simplifies on-site infrastructure footprints and really the requirement to protect those assets on site. So there's a real benefit to cloud-based computing. And what they do is they're advertising unlimited data storage. Data is yours, free and secure access to it through the platform, open APIs or application programming interfaces. Sure, that's great. But the data that you create, that you have access to, you'll be responsible for protecting. It's not their job to protect it for you unless you buy into some sort of third party or secondary process where they'll actually protect it for you for additional costs typically. But normally, if you have access to it, like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud, they give you the cloud instance, and then you're responsible as the provider of the services from that cloud to protect the data. So again, no false sense of security. If you have unlimited data storage and you start using terabytes and terabytes of that data, make sure you've got a data security plan that's going to protect that, okay? Just another newer entry to the DMS provider. This is a company called Tagrail. They advertise themselves as next-gen digital retailing. So what's the benefit here? If I guess they're offering that you can provide the online car sales experience to potential buyers from home. So you can see they've got virtual salespeople, they've got desking for showroom, they've got an in-store experience, and they've got an off-site experience. It's actually the next type of virtualization. And so you're back to, again, that cloud service provider, that sort of extended perimeter where it's beyond the walls of your dealership. You're going to need to think about how are you protecting that data? How can you actually manage that data for your benefit in terms of additional retail opportunities or sales follow-ups? And then how do you retain that data and or destroy it? So lots of different things involved here. And that says nothing particularly of the mobile experience, which also is now becoming a big deal. And where's that data stored? And it's different for Apple versus Android phones, let's say, iPads, versus PC apps, things like that. So it's something to keep in mind. CDK Global, Ray and Ray, Automate, those are great. I mean, they're typical DMS for on-site providers, on-site dealership usage. I know they're extending their opportunities and offerings as well to be in this market niche, but then you have these newer ones as well. And so just keep in mind, whichever one works best for your company, your dealership, keep in mind the different elements that each one brings to the table and where you need to backfill in particular policies or frameworks. In this case, we're talking about for data protection. All right, so quick risk overview. I just wanted to talk quick. Most dealers don't really expect a breach of customer or employee data. Consider if you were hacked, what would you do? So you've got your DMS, you've got your on-site servers, you've got your cloud instance, let's say, you've got your mobile. What do you do going forward if you know you're hacked? And what's going to happen if you're hacked? Well, let's say it's ransomware. With a ransomware engagement, you have to assume that you've been breached. And what will start to happen is each PC is basically going to start locking up as an encrypted unit. So it's going to show typically a red screen, and it's going to say all your files have been encrypted. Please send us X amount of Bitcoin to retrieve the encryption key, the decryption key to be able to get back into your systems. And all across your organization, you're going to get red screens across all of your hosts, including your servers. Hopefully you've got protection so that won't happen. But if you did get affected by ransomware, you're going to start to see that. And immediately the systems will fail. And those processes will stop, whatever they were doing, accounting, sales, inventory tracking, service orders. You'll be back to paper and pencil until that gets resolved. So the thing is, you want to be able to expect that this could happen. And even if it's not something like a ransomware, it could be, let's say, a disaster or an emergency, a flood, some power surge problem or loss of power. All those things really require contingency planning. So you should expect there be a plan put into place that could accommodate if and when those things happen and your systems are affected. Dealerships, of course, are targets. They're basically these treasure troves of NPI, non-public information, personal information. And as I wrote here, the average dealership deal jacket for any particular purchaser really contains everything a thief would need to clone or steal the identity of those particular purchasers or customers. So you have to be cautious. I mean, this is hot. It's basically hot data. It can be used. It's got value. It can be resold, and it can be used to really commit fraud for thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. And in some cases, people are suffering with the repercussions from identity theft for years. So you got to protect this stuff. Dealers, you've probably heard this before, and I'm just reiterating, dealers must comply, with those federal and industry standards that apply, such as GLBA, safeguards rule, protection of financial data. PCI DSS, that's more of an industry standard. That's a voluntary non-government organization standard, but you have to basically conform to it if you're going to accept credit card payments to protect that data. FTC red flags rule. So that's all about trying to understand whether or not you've got a potential identity theft situation occurring, or even if it's a detective control and you see that something happened that shouldn't have. The red flags rule under the federal FTC requires dealerships to have that awareness of how data is used. So it's really just at a minimum here, I just summarized by saying dealerships are really required to have an ISP, or an information security plan, also known as a written information security program, and an identity theft prevention program in place. Those are really the minimums, and that actually encompasses a lot. So there's many things that go into those programs and plans. We'll talk about some of those things to some detail, but just to give you that oversight. This would apply to all NPI data, really including the DMS CRM data that you may have, any related PII that you may collect with regard to your clients, customers, employees, and even third-party service providers or supply chain retailers. So keep it in mind, this needs to obviously be protected, and you need to have an awareness of it before you can protect it. Just again, continuing on here, the primary problem to protect these vast databases of customer NPI, and it can be hundreds of thousands of potential clients if your dealership's been in business for a while. You will have recorded any potential walk into the actual showroom. It could be online inquiries, phone calls, incoming, outgoing service calls, service orders. You're going to accumulate a lot of information over a fairly short period of time. Within 5 years, you're going to have a lot of information. What we see is that a lot of dealerships, they want to do the right thing, of course. They just don't know specifically what rules to follow or what to do if a breach occurs. Let's prevent the breach. I mean, let's be clear. Let's not focus on just having the breach. You definitely need to talk about the contingency plan. But what rules should you follow to prevent those things from happening? And it's providing updates on sort of the latest changes to the law, the industry standards, or adapting dynamically to some of the more recent threats. And I'll talk about some of those toward the end of the presentation as to how those have been exploited lately in the field for dealers, okay? So we want you to know what to do, how to protect the data, and then if something should happen, what's a reasonable response? And that's really, frankly, what the law expects. And even under certain statutes, the degree to which you try to protect the data if there would be any kind of fine or corrective action plan, it really would be much less than it would be if you weren't protecting it. So you have a plan in place, you've got a strategy, you're implementing security controls. Typically, any fines or any kind of egregious result, and even criminal charges in some cases, normally don't accrue because it's a reasonable effort. And that's what we're really looking for. All right, so I'm going to change gears a little bit just to focus on breach likelihood. So again, we're talking about you got DMS in place, you've got a large platform application, you got a lot of data, you've got maybe some supplemental systems on site that you're using to collect data, maybe for phone calls, maybe from kiosks, even marketing information comes in through emails or news advertising, TV advertising. You're going to have a lot of data. So I just want to talk quick about how likely is the fact that you're going to have a breach. These are interesting stats. Sorry about the graphic here. I know it's a little dramatic, but the recent poll showed that more than 30% that were polled think that they'll actually get hit by lightning before they see that their computers are hit with an attack. And that's really, it's just because until it happens to you, you just don't think it's possible. It's going to be the other guy. It's going to be the dealer up the road. But it's much more likely than that. In fact, how likely is it? 85% of dealers experience at least one breach in the last 2 years. Now, remember, it's never really like, when did the breach happen? You've already probably been breached in some way. Again, the insider threat, meaning your own staff, probably exposed data in some way that they shouldn't, or they took something home with them that they weren't authorized to do specifically, maybe inadvertently. These things can happen by mistake. Those are technically breaches. So, how do we prevent breaches either maliciously or from inside or just lack of training? Regardless, these are much more frequent than being hit by lightning, 85% over the last 2 years. Typical larger dealers will have 1 to 7 network events that would require investigation each month. Whether that's being captured in an event or whether that investigation is being done is a different question, but they would warrant an investigation if they are being monitored. In fact, we've got a little stat here. In a typical day, a retail network protected by a third-party managed service provider for security will see up to 153 viruses blocked and 84 spam emails actually identified and blocked. So that's really, that's a front layer of protection that really makes a difference. Your salespeople may be working quickly, they see something come in, they click on it. That could introduce ransomware, malware, viruses. It's good that we're protecting them with these managed security services. Of course, it's not 100% effective, but they're seeing that you're being attacked. I mean, that's the takeaway here. It's not as if you're not having incidents that result in a ransomware. That hopefully is the case, but what is happening is you're being attacked, and they could potentially result in ransomware if you didn't have those controls. In fact, Newspire, who's a MSS, a managed security services provider, they found that 1 in 20 dealerships, as new customers coming to them, were already infected with a botnet that utilized up to 60% of their network bandwidth without them being aware of it. And then, of course, it was handled. So botnets are basically where your PCs or servers on site, if you have them, are being basically infiltrated by malware, and they become essentially relays for other sort of services. It could be email that you're basically blasting out. You might be sending out spam email to other dealers and not know it because you've been compromised and they're using you for your services, not for your data. So there can already be this existential sort of exploitation there, unless you're aware of it. In some sense, you may never know. You might say the network's a little slow, internet's slow today, and never actually see a problem until the traffic itself is analyzed. All right. If you were breached, how would you know? So like I said, you may see really slow internet, for instance. But if you were breached, how would you know? So there was a CDK dealer survey, and actually it was a pretty comprehensive survey. 47% of the dealers that voluntarily responded said that they had software viruses that damaged or disabled their computers, 29% phishing scams, 18% experienced the ransomware, which is almost 1 in 5. So it's not trivial. And then less than 30% reported an attempted but unsuccessful breach. You won't know that, of course, unless you have some kind of monitoring, firewalling, or you've got a third-party service provider actually watching that for you. Okay, and really, this is reflected by these graphs here. So I just talked about these top 4, essentially, but here's, of course, again, the human error by a well-intentioned employee. Large dealers reported cybersecurity incident. It really was a well-intentioned mistake, essentially, but 1 in 5. Ransomware again, electronic fraud, misrepresentation, insider threats from rogue employees or ex-employees. Again, you're disabling accounts for folks after they leave your employment. Accounts, you're changing passwords, things like that. You need to be able to monitor that, especially when they have access to protected data or other keys to the kingdom, like financial data or budgets. So again, takeaway, 85% of all dealers have been the victim of at least one cybersecurity incident during the last 2 years. And if you don't know about it, or you think that it hasn't happened, well, fingers crossed, maybe it hasn't, but more than likely something has occurred. You maybe just don't have an awareness of it. And hopefully it's not some sort of advanced persistent threat where it's something that's actually being actively exploited on a regular basis. Something that can be checked fairly easily by doing the correct scanning and or monitoring. Most dealers, in fact, this reflects what I was just speaking of, most dealers do not have the tech, people, or processes in place to identify or stop breaches. Less than half have UTMs or Unified Threat Management appliances. What we're talking about there mostly are intrusion prevention services or intrusion detection services. And those really plug in right close to the firewall level of perimeter for your online network that has to do with servicing, let's say, the local dealership, your on-site platform, your servers, things like that. Usually cloud-based services are going to be more monitored because the cloud provider will provide that for you. And typically they'll provide some sort of basic services without any additional cost. But again, you need to have some sort of detection mechanism in place. Less than 1/3 had SIM technology in place. So security incident, well, that actually does stand for security incident and event management. That's basically just log aggregation and creating alerts when there's something that deviates past a baseline alert level. So that's something. So for instance, you could set up an alert when network traffic rises to a certain level. Let's say an email alert goes out to the service manager or the IT manager or even executive management, depending if they want visibility into that. SIM technology can really help with that visibility on a regular daily basis, almost real time. Only 35% of dealers, according to the survey, regularly test security systems and processes. That's common. Again, we get back to that sort of set it and forget it. It's easy to do that. Oh, here's my written security plan. Here's my policies. Before you know it, a year, 2 goes by, 3 goes by. You're not really looking at it. Nothing seems to be happening in terms of risk. You think you're covered. Yeah, in fact, you actually need to test that. You need to adapt it. You need to update it. And for audit purposes, you need to show that you did a review. So that 35%, 1 in 3, is really low and is obviously not going to pass muster should there be some sort of audit by a regulatory or industry standard agency. All right, so really, what are we talking about here? Different areas in your dealership. Dealer breach is very common, based on the numbers. It's just to the extent and, the awareness that these things differ. Most dealers do discover breaches the hard way, and most dealers do not have technologies or systems in place to stop breaches or to be notified of the breaches. I'm hoping a lot of you do have something in place, and I'm sure you have something. It's just, there's always opportunities for improvement. But again, you don't need to put, a $100 fence in, to guard a $5 asset. You don't need a top enterprise scale application from a large security provider to provide these services. It needs to be reasonable, and it can be scaled appropriately for your organization. And sometimes that discretionary ability based on even statutory requirements is what's more confusing than anything. It's hard to get an actual list of a punch list of things that you need to do, and here's the vendors, and here's what you do. A lot of times it's open to your interpretation and discretion, and that's where the confusion can come in. All right, this is, again, we're talking about today's threats. Sophisticated, may have multiple attack vectors. I won't read through all this. You can read the slide if you need to. You've probably seen some of this before. But really, what do we need to do? We need to use next-gen technologies because you have limited resources. You need to have the technology in place, or at least the ability to capture data that somebody else can see, like a managed service provider, that can track that information, that log information, aggregate it, and basically alert on it, so that you get rid of the white noise and you can focus on those events or issues or weaknesses in your systems that are going to subject your dealership to potential security incidents.
Hey, Mark, we have a question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So what do you do to block emails that are coming into all the personal PCs we have? Is there any better software we can add to check?
Oh, sure. I mean, so first of all, I would restrict any dealers from letting staff use their personal email address. That's the first thing. So nobody gets to use their Gmail account. Nobody gets to use their Yahoo account. Make sure it's coming through at on the dealership level, from an issued address. So, John Smith at cardealer.com. Everybody's got that cardealer.com address. So that way you can start ensuring that you're not getting any rogue emails from services that aren't monitoring email content for malware. So once you've got that set up, then I would actually recommend going through a cloud provider for email services, something like, frankly, again, I'm not really doing endorsements here, but O365 or Exchange Online right now has some really good spam and phishing protection services available. I think they're almost built in really to the particular platform. So the recommendation is if you can use a cloud service provider, I think you'll find that it just makes it so much easier to manage, and they update the signatures to detect these things on a regular basis. They basically have an entire team dedicated to ensuring that those services are up and running. Plus, you'll get alerts. Now, if you don't have that and you've got on-site email servers, and frankly, there was a large security concern starting back in January over locally installed Exchange servers. It was called the Hafnium breach. They were basically exploited, and inboxes for all the staff could easily have just been downloaded to any offsite location. So what I would say is, if you have an on-prem email system like Exchange, make sure it's patched. Make sure that it's up to date with any recommended security fixes. It's basically a management effort. If you're not going to have it hosted in the cloud, make sure you're doing your patching. You may need to want it reviewed occasionally, annually, let's say, by somebody who's experienced with the technology, with the platform. Just in case you happen to have, let's say, your operations manager take care of it. Generally, from a day-to-day, he may be able to, but he may not be aware of the specific functions or modules available to provide that additional spam or phishing protection. All right.
And then just one more quick question. Just wondering, network solutions opinion? Do you have an opinion on any solutions for the networks?
For network, well, that's kind of a broad question. What I would say is really focus a bit on your endpoint protection. Really, so what's the network doing? It's sharing bandwidth on an internal network, for multiple data hosts. So make sure your endpoint protection's up in place, but also look at the Unified Threat Management platforms. So you want to look at intrusion detection, intrusion protection. Intrusion detection is going to tell you if somebody's gotten in through basically your firewall, through any kind of open port there. Intrusion prevention is going to prevent them from doing that in the first place, based on rules that you can define. And it's, again, based on your business need. you may need a pretty wide open environment, and there's ways to handle that too. So again, I can't really recommend specific technologies for you because I don't want to, I mean, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, but I would look at the UTM, I would look at a solid firewall, a new firewall, and I would make sure that it's being configured appropriately and tested. And there's ways to do port checking and ways to actually stress test through pen testing whether or not you've secured it the way you need it to be secured. All right. All right, I'm going to keep moving on, Kate, just because we're actually running through time here pretty quickly. And it's a good lead in here. How can we implement? Find the right technology. I'm talking about next gen UTM platforms. So again, threat protection, threat detection, SIM software, logging, alerting. And again, people need to be brought into it. It's not just technology. It's going to be people as well that understand the local policies, that really write the local policies that reflect your business's need. It's not meant to come out of a can pre-written and just apply to your organization. So you got to get behind it. And that's really a different sense. We're getting into governance at that point. So executive management, I mentioned it right at the beginning, board of directors, there needs to be a governance over this security function, like everything else that happens in the business. It should be reviewed regularly, and the security program makes sense for your particular organization. All right, have a plan and implement it. It takes people, it takes time, it takes resources, it takes money. These are the things to do. Security always comes at a cost. It's just that cost, as Jim mentioned earlier, that cost can either be a number you start out with, let's say it's $50,000 to get all this equipment or services in place and you're all set to go, or is it going to be $500,000 to remediate a breach after the fact because you weren't paying attention to a particular segment of your security plan or risk vector? All right. I'm going to keep moving through here because I know we are getting short on time. Take a look at this. Again, these were the responsiveness statistics. Again, survey highlights 85% of dealers have been at least hit once over the last 2 years with a security incident. 73% do not utilize SIM tools or logging or alerting, centralized logging and alerting. 66% have not done formal risk assessments. 47% report that they've been actually impacted by malicious software or malware. So important stuff to keep in mind. And you can see what are the number one protection, what are the top protections? The number one is firewall, and that makes sense. In fact, if you have any kind of ISP providing your internet service or internet service provider, they're really going to give you, they'll give you a DMARC, which is just the raw circuit, but then a lot of times they'll even give you a firewall. So 100%, and that's good. There should be no open access to the public internet. And then you can see going down, everybody knows a bit about AV, scanning, and filtering email and web traffic, patching, and then it goes down, and these other things underneath the bubble here, these are also critical for really managing a security program where there's a lot of sensitive data involved. So I want to talk a little bit, just quick, dealer infrastructure challenges, so both technical and with the business. Older technologies can be an issue. If you're running old Windows hosts, they should be updated. Old wireless standards, email security that hasn't been updated or reviewed. Immature processes, you got a policy or you got a procedure, but you're not really doing it and you don't really have a good way to scale it. Business continuity, GRC and policy administration, governance, risk and compliance. Do you have a time of year where you review these things? Who owns the policies in the organization? Who's responsible for updating them? And this back to the question from earlier, poor network design and config, little to no segmentation. In other words, don't put your accounting hosts and resources on the same network as your, say, service arm. Have it isolated and keep it separate. And you can do that logically with current technologies. Remote access immaturity. We've seen a lot of remote access focus over this last year and a half or so. It's matured a lot for people, but there's a lot of different areas here in which you have to be aware of these particular issues. And again, business challenges. Both small to medium businesses and enterprise suffer from this issue. Lack of resources, and your business model may evolve. All right. here's groups that are actually targeting particular auto industries. And there's a lot of jargon here. I'm not going to go through it all, but these APTs, these are advanced persistent threats, which means that it's actually, it's a vulnerability or a risk that may be present in your organization now. You just don't know it yet, or it hasn't been exploited yet. So again, what do we do there? We patch. We have to be aware of security bulletins and notices. I spend a lot of time just going through risk-rated vulnerabilities to try to understand where people need to focus their efforts to either patch or remediate or change configs. All right, and what are these? Malicious files, command shells, spear phishing, attachments, registry keys. People click on files and it modifies the registry of their PC. Obfuscated files or information. So somebody's hiding information or it's masked to look like a regular, let's say an image file. Really, it's malicious. So these are actual groups, and these are global. These are nation states in some case. And you can see last known activity as of when I pulled this, I mean, this is within the last month and a half, we're seeing last known activity for all of these. I just wanted to summarize quick here. Top dealer botnet activity. Remember, we're talking about botnets. You create sort of these zombie PCs when they're infected, and they start doing the commands and bidding of these remote malicious actors. So what are the risks? I'm just going to go through. You can go through this in the slide deck for more detail, but email security, network security, event management. Here it's capturing banking credentials. Here, infected machines are actually being looped into cryptocurrency, coin mining, and spamming users with ads and malware. Remote access. Again, it gives them the ability to remote access into your environment, as if somebody set up a particular PC Anywhere host. Now they can get in, take control over a PC. So RATs or remote administration tools. They can capture keyboard strokes, screen captures, etc. Exploits. I mean, again, they're able to compromise your systems. These are different technical areas, and I don't want to get into the details with you because I know some of this is a bit much, but RDP, brute force login, that's remote access. So, that needs to be locked down. There needs to be a standard. There needs to be patches installed. Things need to be updated accordingly. Email security. Okay, so classic, you're going to receive an email. Please send this now. Please fill in the following form, to get your W-2. It could be anything like that, HR documents, anything relating to current events, US election, BLM protests, tax season docs, anything that's trending. Those are the risks for phishing. You're going to see that. The criminals, they actually adapt very quickly when things are occurring in the world. So bringing it all together, you're integral to really the auto ecosystem. And again, we started with DMS. That's part of it. Your DMS manufacturer and patches that they release and security measures that they have are important. You also have a responsibility on your end to protect the data and some of the things you need to consider, right? So hardware, resources, updating, policies, governance, active threats include these different things. CNC networks or command and control. That's again, botnet. And these affect real companies and real people. All right, just quickly, what can you do? There's got to be individualized infrastructure and security guidelines for your organization defined. It takes a bit of discretion. That's a lot of what I work with in terms of defining which controls make sense for your organization. And it can take time. It takes a bit of analysis to understand that. There's also something called the STAR dealer security recommendations that your staff can review. And, the unified messaging here, obviously these platforms. I want to talk a bit though about the STAR technologies. You can go to these right now, they're free. So this is the standards for technology in automotive retail, best practices for information technology and infrastructure, and quick reference. It's very helpful. If nothing else, it's a great start. And from there, you expand outward, either by speaking to a trusted third party, such as ourselves, or your current provider, and you could ask them about how to test or implement any of the controls that you think may be applicable based on your understanding. So anyway, I tried to wrap it up quickly. I know I went through a lot. We already had a couple of questions. I don't know, Kate, if we have anything additional.
We do not have anything additional. I know Jim wanted to say something. Jim, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to give a couple of closing thoughts. This purpose of this webinar came up because I was asked over the last 6 months to review FCA's data exchange customer data platform with FCA. And if any of you have been unfortunate enough to receive this, if you actually read it, it's pretty frightening. You're making all kinds of reps and warranties about all the security you're going to be providing. But when your information goes upstream, they're not making any reps and warranties about how your data is going to be protected. And I've had it once again, a dealer approach me because their employees, sales staff insists upon using their personal email accounts. They'll go to the scan a credit app, and they'll send it out on their Yahoo account. The damage to your reputation is just incalculable if you're going to be the subject of a newspaper article about how your customers' information was hacked and people were damaged financially. That's not something you can calculate. But you certainly can look at automotive news and see what dealers are paying for failing to maintain the property security plans in place and to test them. In the past, many of you have used shoppers to come in and see what the consumer experience is in your showroom. I would strongly recommend that you consider hiring an outside company to come in and test your security systems to make sure they're up to snuff and they're going to protect you. You're not going to prevent everything, but if you don't make a good faith effort, you're certainly not going to protect anything. One of the things that you need to look at is the reps and warranties that you're making to your insurance company. If you've got cyber insurance, if you actually look at the policy, they don't mind issuing the policy and they don't mind taking your premiums. But when you give them the premiums, you've entered into a contract, and in that contract, you have certain protections in place. And if you have a loss and you don't have those protections in place, you can kiss your premiums goodbye, and they're not going to defend you, nor are they going to indemnify you. There are significant burdens upon running a business with consumer information. I know, because we have the same problem, and quite frankly, that's one of the reasons why we had Mark join us. So I've got some level of comfort, but I cannot stress strongly enough how important it is to have in place and to utilize sufficient data protection systems so that your business is protected in its reputation. And most importantly, that's done by protecting your consumer data. I want to say thank you for joining us, and I hope you got some benefit out of this. Again, please feel free to reach out to Mark. Kate will be uploading this video recording to our website. It'll be available to you if you want to watch it again. And good luck.
So thank you all for attending, and everyone have a great day.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job.